is One Academy? One Academy is an innovative e-learning platform covering a broad range of financial topics, including financial analysis, asset management, forex, the stock market, cryptocurrency, and much more. Our mission is to provide our students with the guidance and educational materials required to achieve financial literacy. One Academy was developed by finance experts and academics. It is highly structured and easy to understand. You learn at your own pace and can be part of the future of global finance. Our intention is to give you a unique sense of understanding and facts, which you can use to enhance your knowledge and daily life, as well as promote our core product, One Academy, and the benefits of our ecosystem. I encourage you to take copious notes to assist you in your quest to become certified, knowledgeable, and wise business leaders and money managers. Our presenter today is from the Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. He is my good friend and colleague, and I would just like to read a bit of his bio. So our presenter today, Alvin Morton, joined OneLife in April 2017. He's an educated miner, and he has completed both levels 1 and 2. And he's one of our earliest One Academy presenters. An industrial engineer graduate from the University of the West Indies. He is the holder of an MBA from the Harriet Watt University and PMP for Project Management Institute. He is also an avid Toastmaster of 9 years. Alvin is married with 2 daughters and resides in central Trinidad. And one of his most favorite quotes is, "It is not the movement of the clock, the newness of life. It is the movement in your mind." And that being said, I would like to turn over to our master presenter, Mr. Alvin Morton. Alvin, are you there?
A pleasant good day, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to whichever part of the world that you're from. Yes, sir, I am most present, and I would like to thank you for that very kind introduction. I trust that my voice and all other clarity in terms of screen is appropriate. We will not delay much longer because I'm sure that we are all looking forward to learning something today to be able to lead tomorrow. So permit me to share my screen. And as I do that, I'm going to just make some other checks. Right, there's this thing called share computer sound that's important. Today's topic, fellow One Academites, is quantitative easing. Yes, some of us may have heard of this topic, and we might be wondering, well, what is this thing called quantitative easing? And why is it that we should even be interested in a topic such as this? I want to open with this quotation or this statement made by the late John Kenneth Galbraith, Canadian-born economist, Harvard professor, and author. Money, whence it came, where it went. The study of money above all other fields in economics is one in which complexity is used to disguise truth or to evade truth, not to reveal it. The process by which banks create money is so simple, the mind is repelled. With something so important, a deeper mystery seems only decent. I thought this was an interesting way to open our session this morning. And even as we do that, we recognize, and I wish to reiterate, the information contained herein and dispensed is not designed to be a source of financial information, nor should it be construed as such. OneLife is not an investment company, but we do, however, make the claim that the more informed we are as part of a due diligence process, the better decisions we can make for ourselves and those who depend upon us. Let's get into some definitions. And my reference source is the trustedinvestopedia.com. Quantitative easing is a form of extraordinary monetary policy used by central banks to quickly increase the domestic money supply and spur economic activity. Usually involves the central bank purchasing longer-term government bonds as well as other types of assets, such as mortgage-backed securities. Sounds familiar? Wasn't this something that was being done in 2008 or the run-up to 2008? A word to the wise. The Federal Reserve announced a 700+ billion quantitative easing program on March 15, 2020 to backstop the US economy against the coronavirus. This was quoted straight out of the Investopedia.com website. This follows an earlier pledge by the Fed to fund up to $1.5 trillion to the overnight bank repo market and bond purchases to fight the economic slowdown. I thought it was appropriate, after looking at that definition, to introduce for our consideration monetary policy versus fiscal policy. What is monetary policy? It involves the management of the money supply and interest rates by, yes, you guessed it, central banks. So they can either stimulate or give a stimulus to a faltering economy by cutting interest rates, making it less expensive to borrow while increasing the money supply. If they wish to slow down the economy, the central bank can implement a tight monetary policy by reversing those actions, raising interest rates and retrieving money from circulation. Can't seem to remember the last time I've seen the last point being implemented. Fiscal policy, on the other hand, determines the way in which the central government earns money through taxation and how it spends money. And some would argue that it's not money that is being spent, but it is currency. And I'd invite each and every one of us to research the difference, because according to Mike Maloney, there is a difference between money and currency. With fiscal policy, a government can stimulate, assist, or give stimulus to an economy by cutting tax rates while increasing its own spending. Those of us who might have studied or read anything about John Maynard Keynes would know that this is something that he might have articulated, not in so many words, when the UK had its issues back in the 1930s to 40s. To cool down an overheating economy, it will raise taxes and cut back on spending. What does all this have to do with quantitative easing? I'm going to let Mr. Chris Martinson, for the next 11 minutes or so, give us an interesting perspective on this topic.
Welcome to this chapter on quantitative easing, or QE. Here in 2014, the developed world is currently in the middle of the largest monetary experiment in all of history. One that splits the entire world.
We're not hearing.
This is very important because when you strip away a lot of economic gobbledygook, money is really a social contract. We agree that it has value, but otherwise, it's bad.
Something must have happened here. I'm going to stop this share and start it over.
Much thanks, sir.
Because it has to be that the share sound didn't.
Okay, so Mira, that you were sharing perfectly, so carry on.
Welcome to this chapter on quantitative easing, or QE. Here in 2014, the developed world is currently in the middle of the largest monetary experiment in all of history, one that spans the entire globe. This is very important because when you strip away a lot of economic gobbledygook, money is really a social contract. We agree that it has value, but otherwise, it's backed by nothing more substantial than that, our mutual agreement. Given this context, we should view money printing as really more of a social experiment than a sophisticated monetary practice. And so we're going to study it here as such because when a nation's money system breaks down, society as a whole is impacted. Commerce is heavily disrupted, shelves are cleared, careers are ruined, and the future is badly diminished. So what exactly is quantitative easing, or QE? Well, it's money printing. Simple as that. However, today we don't actually print all that much physical cash. So when I say money being printed, don't think of big stacks of $100 bills. Think instead of digital ones and zeros, mainly a lot of zeros, showing up on electronic ledgers. We discussed QE briefly in the chapter on the Fed, but here we'll go into it in slightly more detail. Again, the way the Fed creates money is simply by creating an accounting entry that says the money exists. Imagine if one day you woke up, checked your bank account, and found $1 billion in it. Looking into it, you discovered the Fed had deposited that money there last night. This money would be very real to you and would completely change your financial circumstances. You could spend it just the same as if you had earned it over 66,313 years, working at the current minimum wage of $7.25 per hour and saving every dime. But where did the Fed get that $1 billion? What did it do to earn that much money? This quote tells the tale. And let me highlight that last line, because that's the important one here. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money. Now, in our example, the Fed simply created money when it sent it to you. Tap, 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 a few keys were clicked on a keyboard, and voila, your $1 billion was created and deposited in your account. At the end of 2013, this process was being used to the tune of $85 billion per month. Only that money was not going into your account, not unless you were a very large financial institution. The Fed creates that money when it buys either treasury bonds or mortgage-backed securities, which is what MBS stands for. And the mechanism is really easy to explain. Say the Fed wants to buy $40 billion of treasury bonds. Well, first it will announce to the market, which actually means the big banks who play in this game, that it wants to buy $40 billion of treasury bonds and the price range it's willing to pay for them. A variety of banks will then offer up the specific bonds at specific prices, and the Fed chooses which among them to actually buy and then buys them. These bonds are now assets on the Fed's book, so if we were to take a look at the Fed balance sheet, we should see it growing by leaps and bounds over the last few years. Indeed, that's exactly what we see. The Fed's balance sheet is now nearly $4 trillion in size, and every single one of the dollars represented by that $4 trillion number was literally printed, or mouse-clicked, into existence out of thin air. Now, to really make the point that these are extraordinary and unusual times, I shall point out that the Fed's balance sheet was only some $880 billion before the economic crisis struck in 2008. That is, to grease every economic transaction throughout the nation's entire history up until 2008 required the cumulative injection of $880 billion of circulating base money that the banks could use to lend out via fractional reserve banking. But since 2008, an additional $3 trillion has been created by the Federal Reserve and injected into the system. So where did all that newly created money go? What did it do? Well, we should be able to detect it if we look at a chart of circulating money in our system known as base money. And yep, that's exactly what we see. This additional $3 trillion has found its way into various corners and crevices of the financial universe, But the majority of it, around $2.3 trillion, is parked right back at the Fed in the form of something called excess reserves. Now, recall, banks keep some money in reserve when they make a loan out of deposits. And if they keep more than is required, that money is called an excess reserve. So this chart tells us that the Fed has been pumping money into the financial system, but the majority of that money has not been made available to Main Street in the form of new loans. Instead, it has been round-tripped and idly parked back at the Fed, where it earns 0.25% interest. But this still leaves us with some $700 to $800 billion, which has not been parked in the form of excess reserves, which is out there bidding up stocks and bonds and real estate, mainly due to large institutions buying up vast quantities of all three asset classes using money the Fed printed out of thin air. This chart showing the relationship between the S&P 500 and Fed printing tells the tale. It's a safe prediction to make that the U.S. stock market will fall and fall a lot if the Fed were to suddenly stop printing up money. The stock market is now hooked on this artificial stimulus. So, how long can this money printing continue? At some point it needs to stop, right? I mean, we'll destroy the value of the dollar if we print too many of them, right? The answer to this is yes, but it's a lot easier to say than to do. A huge but poorly understood concern is that this freshly printed money, once created and released into the financial universe, is going to be very, very difficult to retrieve, should that be necessary. You see, quantitative easing, it works really well when the money is going out the Fed's front door, but it's not going to work very well in reverse. In fact, it may be impossible without crashing the stock and bond markets, creating all sorts of difficulties for both the Fed and our leaders in Washington, D.C. And here's why. When the Fed is out there buying a huge proportion of something, say, Treasury bonds, the price of that asset class is driven up in the marketplace by the demand being artificially created or printed out of thin air by the Fed. That's just economics 101. Because the Fed pre-announces its asset purchases, the folks it buys these assets from have a huge advantage. And here's why. When the Fed announces its plans to buy a bunch of Treasury bonds, the banks rush out and buy them first. This is called front-running. Then the banks turn around and sell these very same Treasury bonds to the Fed, but at a higher price than they bought them for, allowing them to pocket fat profits. Pretty sweet deal, huh? Everyone is happy playing this game. The U.S. government enjoys a strong market for its debt, plus gets ultra-low interest rates as part of the deal. The banks make big money with no risk, and the Fed gets a lot of freshly printed money out into the system, further driving down interest rates, which boosts the bond market, the stock market, and housing prices. Now that's a win-win-win situation right there. Well, as long as you're one of the ones receiving the money, I suppose. In this scenario, everyone loves the Fed and its magic checkbook, which makes all these popular results possible. Well, at least to everyone in power that can skim easy profits from the system. But now let's try running that process in reverse. What happens when the Fed decides it's time to stop flooding the world with free money and instead attempts to reduce the money supply, when it tries to reverse the flow of money from out the doors to back in its doors? Where the Fed was buying Treasury bonds from the banks at a profit to the banks, when the Fed turns around to sell these same assets back to those banks, the reverse will, by definition, be true, meaning the banks will be buying Treasury bonds that are falling in price, not rising. The Fed will be demanding money from the banks and in return will be giving them bonds that it is flooding the market with. Prices in a flooded market only head one direction, and that's downwards. And at the same time, the U.S. government will still be selling plenty of new bonds into the market. Only now, the Fed won't be there buying them. What does this mean? It means that the new bonds from the government, plus the ones being sold by the Fed, will be competing for a dwindling supply of money. And mathematically, that also means that interest rates will be rising. And as interest rates go up, the bond markets will suffer losses, as will stocks and home prices. That is, everything the Fed has worked so hard to engineer since the 2008 crisis unfolded will be undone. And likely within a very short time period, perhaps just a few months. If you've been wondering why the Fed spent most of 2013 hemming and hawing about whether or not to decrease or taper its ongoing $85 billion in monthly asset purchases, this is the main reason. It fears undoing all the years of hard work it spent getting the stock and bond and housing markets to inflate. But if the Fed cannot easily undo its quantitative easing efforts, then What are the risks we all face? Well, here's where history is really quite clear. You can get away with printing for a while, but when it catches up with you, it does so with a vengeance. The reason is not terribly hard to understand. You cannot print true prosperity. Real wealth does not come from printed money. Real wealth only comes from real people performing actions that create real value. If it were possible to print up prosperity, every central bank should simply cook up enough new money to hand out to its citizens and eliminate poverty forever. But, of course, that cannot work. Money is not real wealth. It's merely a claim on wealth. You can print up as many new claims on wealth as you want, but the amount of real stuff, if it remains the same, then it's going to shrink in relation to all that printed money. That's called inflation. Quantitative easing and the other central bank shenanigans of the past several years are not ordinary. They aren't normal, and they haven't been tried before. They signal a huge and abnormal departure from everything we know about what works and what doesn't work economically. It is an extraordinary experiment. You and I, we need more to our wealth strategies besides complacency and hope. Perhaps this time is different, but if not, and it almost never is, then we should all be crystal clear on the risks. At the exponential pace at which the Fed is increasing the money supply, and knowing the huge challenges the Fed and most of the other world central banks face in trying to stop or even slow down their money printing, the potential for a disruptive global inflationary period is very real. Which brings us to the next chapter on inflation. Thank you for listening.
Perhaps at another time we shall have a session on inflation where we will address those matters as they relate to quantitative easing. This video on QE is part of a set of 26 videos done by Chris Martinson. Chris Martinson, of course, is someone who has been espoused and touted as a reputable source by Mike Maloney, the author of The Hidden Secrets of Money. We should note, though, that our One Academy has quite a bit to say, and I don't have the space, and of course, page 7 talks about bailouts, especially in the case of Greece that received money from the troika of the IMF, the European Central Bank, and the European Union. Page 7 also makes reference, and this is of the Level 1 manual, to the printing presses of the US Fed Reserve and European Central Bank seeming to be running without a break. But this was considered necessary to give the appearance for stable demand of government bonds. And I invite every one of us to read, especially those who may not have gone into their manuals as yet. Page 8 talks about the new century has already featured 2 new crises: the bust of the dot-com bubble in 2001, which led the then Federal Reserve to lower interest rates to 1%, and ultimately we reaped the Great Recession thereafter in 2008. And of course, the answer of the Fed Reserve in both cases was simple enough: print more money and lower the interest rate. Now we're seeing things about interest rates being lowered into negative territory. We wonder what would happen after that, especially if it does not yield the desired results. Some key takeaways: money is a social contract. We agree that it has value, and this is something I've heard King James say, and I think previous versions of the One Academy manual said it as much. Money is anything we agree on. QE is simply money, or more correctly, currency printing. And it's not necessarily that it is physically printed. It is more like digital ones and zeros, and probably more zeros simply being added to an electronic ledger. And I just ask this question for those of us who may be thinking about it but haven't yet articulated it. Is this why cryptos were banned first until something called a CBDC, or central bank digital currency, could be introduced? And we should note how the US has introduced theirs. Freshly printed money once in the system is very difficult to retrieve. Stock prices drop, bond prices drop, housing prices fall. We know the rest of the story. QE works well when money is moving from the Fed to big banks. Doesn't seem to do that well according to the video. And I think when we look at our experience in whichever country we're from, we can attest to some measure of truth in these statements. From the Fed to the big banks, there is demand for US debt, low interest rates, big banks realize large profits at no risks. Bond prices, stock prices, housing prices are on the upswing. And of course, the reverse is true when money is being taken out of circulation. That's when monetary policy is tightened. Rising interest rates, of course, dampen consumer spending as well, eventually leading to recession, which no policymaker wants to talk about. Negative economic growth and even deflation. I thought it was interesting, though, according to investopedia.com, that deflation is a general decline in prices for goods and services, typically associated with a contraction in the supply of money or tightening of the monetary policy and credit in the economy. During deflation, the purchasing power of currency rises over time. And I thought it was fascinating that there are two schools of thought, two views on this. There are those economists who say deflation is the next best thing to slice bread because, of course, the purchasing power of currency increases. And there are those who are of the opposite view. I leave it to us to determine which view we think seems to have dominant currency or popularity in our systems. True prosperity cannot be printed into existence. I thought that was a powerful statement. Real wealth only comes from real people performing actions that create real value. And I think this is something that our One Academy, One Life ecosystem and One Academy in particular should represent and does present. It is only because of the One Academy, quite frankly, that I've been able to put together a lot of things that I've studied over many years. Money is only a claim on wealth. And then I have this question. Is therefore all the money or currency that has ever been created loaned into existence? And if we wish to make a comparison, we should note that the cryptocurrency market cap, and this was as of yesterday, was $208 billion, with Bitcoin back on the upswing. A few weeks ago, it was down at 5,000. Now it's at 7305.60. But as if to add insult to injury, I'd like to play a few minutes of this video from Mike Maloney, where he talks about 6 trillion lies. Let's listen in and take notes as we may deem appropriate.
This video is titled 6 Trillion Lies, and here's why.
So the total package here comes to roughly $6 trillion, $2 trillion direct assistance, roughly $4 trillion in Federal Reserve lending power. Again, it'll be the largest Main Street financial package in the history of the United States. Liquidity and cash for families, small business, individuals, unemployed to keep this thing going. We're heading for a rough period, but it's only going to be weeks, we think. Weeks and months, not going to be years, that's for sure. And hopefully pave the way for continued economic recovery.
So, there's a couple of lies there. One of them, he said that it was a package for Main Street. Yes, there's $2 trillion of it that's going to be mailed directly. I mean, people are going to start getting checks in the mail. That's going to the public. The other $4 trillion is for business. And he talked about small business. But do you think they're going to let, I mean, what do you think? Do you think they're going to let the S&P 500 companies fail? And that's what would happen if we don't bail them out also. So the majority of that $4 trillion is going to be directed toward all of the biggest companies on the planet. And yes, small businesses will be able to get loans too, but most of the things like dry cleaners and restaurants and things, a lot of these places are going to go under. They're going to hurt. The world is going to be a little bit different after this thing, maybe a whole lot different. The other lie in there was that this would take just weeks or months at the most. Well, you know what? 6 months is a minimum, 18 months, possibly even longer is a maximum. Take a look at what happened with the Spanish flu. That took like 18 months for that thing to burn itself out. And so it all depends on if we can develop a vaccine, but those things usually take a year or so to do. So, we're spending a lot of currency on this, but the other portion of the 6 trillion lies here is that this already sits, they already did a package for the coronavirus that was 800 and some billion dollars. And we were already doing more than $1 trillion deficit spending. So that package took it up above 2 trillion. So this takes the deficit spending up above $8 trillion already. And it hasn't stopped. This is going to go on. It isn't 6 trillion. It isn't even going to stop at 60 trillion. We're at the end of a debt super cycle right now, and along with it, a shift in world monetary system. They call it a monetary reset. I've been giving lectures on it since 2009. I could see the shift in the world monetary system coming way back then, and I called it the death of the dollar standard.
I wouldn't wish to take up any more time. I think we get the point. I'd encourage each and every one of us to Google the terms, research the terms. QE, quantitative easing, monetary policy, fiscal policy. We saw something there on deficit spending. Get to information sessions and or get into the One Academy Level 1. It is an eye-opening document, if I may say so myself. And this quote from Jack Welch, I think, encapsulates for me what we see taking place. And it is this: if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. Have a super fabulous day, everyone, and continue to stay safe. I now wish to return control of this day's proceedings to our congenial host, Dr. Dwayne KD.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alvin, for that thought-provoking presentation. Always giving us information to stimulate thought. And most definitely that that particular presentation would have been in sync with what our illustrious Blue Diamond King James continues to say. Money is what we agree upon. All right, so at this point in time, what we would like to do is shift gear for a moment and concentrate on our deal shaker. So in our deal shaker segment today, we have our deal shaker merchant, who is Miss Anne-Marie Augustine, and she features her business paralegal professional. So we want to ask Miss Anne-Marie if she can unmute her mic and shine into this morning's call. By the way, Miss Anne-Marie is a mother and business professional, and she has 15 years experience in the paralegal business. And of course, when we engage with her, she's going to elaborate on what that business entails and speak to us about some of the deals that she has up on her deal shaker profile at the moment. Ms. Anne-Marie, are you able to unmute your mic?
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be part of this. It's has been an exciting experience. While I was in law school, did an external degree in law, and I really didn't like criminal law and that other part of it. So I came up with the idea to form a paralegal service company, which will provide like a backup service for attorneys and some of the things that they would need to prepare and file their documents in the court. And some of those things were like land title investigation, business searches and registration of businesses, filing and lodging documents at the court, retrieving documents, a little taxation because of the company aspect of my work. My mainstay really was land title investigation, because every time a property is purchased, you must do an investigation on that property to find out whether it has good title. And that service is needed throughout the country and every financial institution, all the law firms. So I offer that service on the DealShaker platform. So 50% coins, 50% cash. I offer company registration and intellectual property registration as well. You know, if you have an idea and you want to register that idea so no one can steal that idea, I do intellectual property registration. I also do taxation for the companies that I register. I do all their corporate taxes and so on. I also do filing of legal documents in the court and retrieving legal documents as well. And all of those services, my general paralegal service is on the DealShaker platform. You can call me at 481-5435 to get an insight and a more in-depth look at some of the services that I offer, because it's far and wider. This is much more than I'm discussing now, because anything within the legal fraternity that you can think of, we offer it. We don't go to the court, but we can prepare legal documents for you. We can have it, get it signed by a law firm. We can lodge it for you. We can register your company. We can file your taxes and do your annual returns. We can search. We can do car search. We can do property search. We can do intellectual property search as well to see if anybody has a patent registered. I'm looking forward to doing great things with this organization because my service is needed.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you very much, Ms. Anne-Marie. As we see your profile being shown up on the screen right now, one thought-provoking question that I would like to ask you: what intrigued you about the DealShaker and cryptocurrency that it motivated you to become a part of the DealShaker system?
I didn't hear you properly.
Yes, I'm saying, what intrigued you about the DealShaker that you thought of putting your business on the DealShaker platform?
Okay, what really intrigued me is when I came to the meetings, I realized that there were a lot of business people involved in OneCoin. The majority are the people who were business minds. And my service is something they would definitely need, because they would buy property, they would sell property, they would want their taxes done, because businessmen are usually very busy people and don't have the time to go and stand in line and file document, lodge documents. So it was an excellent opportunity to showcase my business on this platform and to be a part of it, and to enrich the organization as well, you know.
Indeed, indeed. So you're actually creating value for persons, business persons in the community, while
Yes, people in and out of the organization.
right, and while simultaneously creating value for yourself in the process.
Great, yes, definitely.
All right. So we want to thank you, Ms. Anne-Marie, for shining in today, for being our featured merchant, and we do wish you all the best and good success in your future endeavors with us and on the DealShaker platform.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great. And to that end, folks, we want to bring this evening's call to a close. We want to thank you for shining in from whatever part of the world that you shone in from. I saw there was a particular comment from a gentleman asking for Mr. Morton to slow down in terms of probably his vocal speed on the presentation, because possibly that English was not his first language and he was basically struggling to follow. But be rest assured that this content is being recorded and you can access it and review it at your convenience. So On behalf of the Dealshaker team and the One Academy team, I want to bid you farewell, good evening, good day, good night, wherever you are. One's out from us here in the Caribbean.